Right. So when we matrix question, we've got to solve some equations in context. One of the things people fall down on, lose points for, use points marks for, is not putting their questions in context, and not saying what variables they're using. And with all of these, with the mark schemes we've seen, the first thing you need to do is define your variables. So I'm going to have x is the value of the savings account, and that's going to be when he invests it. Y is going to be a value of the property bond account, and Z is going to be a value of share dealing account. Try and be as specific as you can, just to make sure you get all the marks in an exam. Okay, if you don't do that, you'll end up losing a mark. Right, then we've got to turn all the information we've been given into some equations. That's the easiest thing to do first, and then write our matrix. So he invested a total of 5,000. So that means the value of all of ours added up needs to be 5,000. Use that piece of information. He invested £400 more in property than the savings. So the property bond is the same as the savings plus 400, which can be rewritten to have the x and y on the same side. Use that piece of information. Now then we've got after 1 year, we've got some information that have changed. So the savings account has increased in value by 1.5%. So we're going to use our knowledge of percentages and decimals. We want to increase the property bond by 3.5%, but we want to decrease the savings, the share dealing, by 2.5%, and that's now equal to 5,079 because he's got £79 extra. Now we've used that info, we have to solve a matrix equation. So now we've written our equations, and in all the mark schemes there's always been a couple of marks for writing the correct equations. We're going to turn this in. So the coefficients of x, y and z go into our matrix. I've got slightly out of alignment here, these numbers are slightly longer. Then comes x, y, z. They have to go that way. It doesn't make sense to go the other way because you wouldn't be able to multiply them. And then what must that be equal to? So make sure you get your lines correct. That was 5,000, that was 400, and that was 5,079. So you can see the numbers from each equation are all on the same row, and then x, y, z forms a column. Right, we then need to show we're using the inverse matrix. Oops. Now it has to be in this order, so if I call this matrix M, then I've got M times x, y, z equals the answer that we want it to be equal to. And what I'm actually doing is, remember with matrix multiplication, the order matters, so I'm pre-multiplying both sides by the inverse. You can use your calculator now to find the inverse, because they're not testing. They'd write the question a different way if they wanted to test you could find the matrix inverse, and sometimes the numbers are quite hard for these questions. So use your calculator to find the inverse. You might like to write down what your inverse matrix is somewhere on your paper. If you can just copy it off the calculator just to show that you've done that. But then what we need to write as our main working is what x, y and z are equal to. Okay, but then for the final mark, we do need to put this back into context and write something. So we have to say how much he invested in each account. So the 1,800 was in the savings account, and so on. If you don't put context in all the ones we've seen, you've ended up losing 2 marks, and that can make all the difference in your exam. So make sure you always on these ones have context.